is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
First catalog, we went around and found every last utility or piece of software that we could put out there unashamedly. People used to complain about our royalty, and I used to say, go to a flea market and sell it off the back of your station wagon. You know, the royalty's the royalty. I know it's not much.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Paul Cubbage was director of Atari Program Exchange. There, he was head of reviewing software submissions and publishing the APX catalog. He worked at Atari from April 1981 through January 1984. This interview took place on October 3rd, 2016.
I graduated from the University of Illinois and started at an insurance company. And I had lived different places, including Florida and Germany and the Air Force. And I wanted to live somewhere that was beautiful and had warm weather. Somehow I thought that was California, but that's a different story. Anyway, I was married my senior year in college, and I was 25 at the time, and we were living in Chicago a couple of years, and I went back to school for a year and discovered that I'd gotten a degree and never knew how to study. In grad school, you had to study. So we went back to Chicago, and I got a job as an editor, and I edited a textbook called Automotive Maintenance and Troubleshooting for a year. So I had some editing experience, and we decided to leave. So one February day, we got on the Highway 66 and drove west. And we stayed with my brother-in-law and my sister for a little while, and then we went up to Berkeley and stayed with friends. Then we went back to L.A. again because I couldn't find work in San Francisco in '63. And I'd helped my brother-in-law at one time, and he kind of reciprocated it's the opposite. He helped me. He was looking in the L.A. Times, which was the way to find a job in L.A. at the Times. And he circled an ad, said, that should be pretty good. You should take a look at it. So I told people I have a classical background in computer sciences. I was a 1401 trainee at an insurance company in 1963.
Sure.
So I learned to program the 1401, and it was a 2-week class at the time. Midway through, I kept saying, you have a choice about doing things, and you do. Why in the hell would you do it this way? So that was the first computer I looked at, and the instructor looked at me like, what do you mean? This is the way, Don't ask that question. And so I worked there a year or two, and then bounced around a little, and I ended up, at the time, we were living in Seal Beach. My wife was pregnant and getting her degree at Long Beach State. This is like 63. And going into 64, my job I had at Orange County fell through. My boss had a nervous breakdown, and I got a job with GE at NASA Ames. And the guy hired me because I was the only one who printed his resume on a computer, which was a trick back in those days. And so I worked at NASA Ames, and GE lost the contract, and I worked for Computer Sciences, which at the time was a leading software company. And I wrote some incredible macros in the 1401. I got interested in system stuff. And then after a couple, almost 3 years at NASA Ames with Computer Sciences, and they were having me out on contract. And back then, real men, they bid a job, and you got a fixed price contract and a manual for a computer you'd never written. Seen before. So I did contract programming for a while, and then I was doing COBOL. And I answered an ad, and I got a job with Arthur Young and Company. And that was one of the higher level jobs you could get at the time, was with an accounting firm as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And I bounced around on various contracts from place to place. And in doing that, I developed some software, and I actually wrote a spreadsheet and a desktop publishing program in COBOL, and you could sit at a key punch and type, and it would figure out beginning and end of sentences and would capitalize the first character. And it was pretty interesting trying to figure out what the end of a sentence was. So in Sacramento, I went from LA to the Bay Area, and then I was on a contract in Sacramento, and I was working for a company, RKA, and this is like 77, and they had a Unix system, version 6, doing blood bank automation. And it was kind of a wild company. There were 15 people in it, and when it blew apart, 13 people went out and started stuff. 4 of them started the Unified Database Company.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been talking to a guy on the phone. I'd gotten a hold of him. We'd heard about a Unix running on the Interdata machine, which we thought to be the best mini computer around. And it certainly was, but, nobody cared. The best never wins, is my experience in computing. And that even includes, Apple and the iPhone today, as far as I'm concerned. But, well, they are winning. Never mind. Forget what I said. Anyway, everybody kept saying, well, there's some kid that's in the AT&T journal that in Australia who ported Unix to the Interdata. Does anybody know anything about it? And he was going to school at the University of Wollongong. And I kept hearing that talk once in a while. So one day I looked up the clock. I was running marketing at the time. I had burned out on a programming job trying to do a property database, and Prop 13 passed and killed it all. That's the time when I sat at a computer for 70 hours trying to solve a problem. I used to ask people, how long did you ever sit at a terminal trying to solve a problem, just taking bath breaks and coffee and such? And most people said 3 days, but there's a guy named John Sokol who's truly remarkable. He's a whole separate story. And he did a 7x24 1 week at Sun, and they didn't want to pay him. But he said, look at the security videos. So anyway, I got tired of hearing about this guy in Australia, so I looked at the clock. So right now it'd be about 7 in the morning in Australia. Okay, it'd be 6. Mm-hmm. It's 15 hours from now, approximately. And at that time, it was around 5, and I figured going on 5, and I figured it's going on 9 o'clock. I bet they're working in Australia. So I picked up the phone, and you can tell this is the old days. I dialed the operator, and I said, dialed up long distance, and I said, give me international. And I got international. I said, give me Australia. And they got me to Australia, and I said, give me Wollongong. And they got to Wollongong. I said, give me the university. And sure enough, the University of Wollongong answered. And I said, do you have an Interdata computer there? And she saw the computer. So I said, wait a minute, you got a computer sciences department? She said, yeah. I said, give me that. Sitting there was the head, and he'd been trying for 2 years to get a company to pay attention to a student who had ported Unix to the Interdata.
Huh.
So he picks up the phone. I said, hi, I'm Paul Cubbage in Sacramento with RKA, and we're interested in, I forget his name, software. So we ended up meeting him at a computer show in LA at the time. And that's where I met Ken Thompson, the inventor of Unix. Dennis Ritchie was there too. Mm-hmm. Ritchie's gone. Mm-hmm. And we signed the deal, and Wollongong got started. Well, the two guys I sold the idea to were looking for venture capitalists. There were three of us who went down, two buddies who were supporting me, and one of them knew these two guys. So we went down and met them. And nobody was funding software companies in, what the hell's a year? It'll come to me at some point, 1980. So this one guy he decided to do it out of pocket. He'd made money off of a business computer company he'd started. And so we got Wollongong going, but nothing was selling, and I was doing the marketing and finding leads. And they decided somebody had to go, so the number one founder got to go, right?
Sure.
Like, I got laid off from the company I founded. All the business I developed before they laid me off came in, and that's how they kept going until they got to the next stage. So I'm out of work for about 5 weeks, and I think I contacted a headhunter. And he said, would you like to work at Atari? And I said, yes. He said, have you ever had a microcomputer? I said, yeah, I had a Radio Shack, TRS-80, for a while. And so I got to go to Atari, and that's where I met Fred Thorlin, who was running Apex at the time. If you've met Fred, haven't you?
Yes, I've interviewed Fred, yeah.
Yeah, so Fred and I clicked right off, and he just did a walkabout through Atari, and we went over to the arcade group, and there was Ed Rothberg there. He'd done that tank game, and he did that by putting 124-bit array processor inside of. Those guys in the arcade at the time designed their own machines. So when you played an Atari arcade machine in 1980, you're playing an original design. And then I met some of the real money makers, which were, of course, the VCS programmers. Some of them had actually made more than $1 million in royalties. And then we went to the game room, and I played some games, and he asked me about the micro I'd had, and I said, yeah, I wasn't real impressed with the Tandy, other than when you turned it on, it said ready, which meant you had BASIC. And supposedly you could compile Pascal on it with a tape drive, cassette tape drive. So, learning a program, I just typed in the sample program, and 2 hours later produced an error, and stopped, even though I had done it verbatim. I thought, I didn't have $1,500 for a disk drive at the time, so I sold my Tandy off. Anyway, Fred hired me. So we were kind of freelance at the time because I was trying to figure out how to get the Atari Program Exchange going, and also how to attract developers. Now, it turns out that at the time, the way to attract developers was, A, you had to have an installed base, and B, you had to have software tools. And at the time, Atari thought it had 12,000 installed base, right? And going through the records, they discovered they'd manufactured close to 30,000 computers. That many were stolen.
Wow.
Somebody was drop shipping them. It's just unbelievable, right?
Wow. Yeah.
It was a large number. You got to remember, this is a memoir. So we started looking for tools, and Chris Crawford, and you know him, the fabulous game developer,
sure,
did Eastern Front, and just a wild man, a geologist. He did that game on the atomic power plant.
Right, Scram.
Scram. And everybody said, that's terrible, that doesn't happen. And Chris said, I worked in an atomic power plant. That stuff did happen. That's the scary part. Anyway, we went through and got every last note that the Atari developers had, and Chris assembled them into a book and added what he knew, because Chris used to put on a show. He'd dress up in a chip suit and teach you how the Atari graphics work, right?
Right.
I mean, the place was just wonderful to be in. You know, there were all these people, and they were just running loose. And he put together Daybreak Atari from that and what he added to it. And it was like a big, 3-inch binder, which caused much trouble later on with the 1200. And so we started recruiting developers, and our goal was to have, some 400 programs in 2 years of that out on the market. And it was like hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, the developer saw that and jumped right on it, and the Atari was this is the 800, was such an attractive machine to them that the software started producing. So then we started putting together the process for Apex. Now, what's his name? The guy whose idea it actually was couldn't get along with the software people who had come out of Control Data, who were very organizational, and they wouldn't let him run Apex.
Are you talking about
his wife,
Dale?
Pardon?
You talking about Dale?
Pardon? Yes. His
Dale.
wife ran manufacturing for Apex, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I was in charge of product. We hired an editor, and she put together the catalog and that kind of thing. So initially, our first catalog, we went around and found every last utility or piece of software that we could put out there unashamedly, or without too big of a blushing. And I think we put out around 30 products the first catalog. And we started off by advertising. We were going to have the Star Award, and we were going to give $25,000 to the annual winner.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to have contests every quarter, because we published them every quarter, in 4 categories: systems, education, home improvement, and games. And the one program we put out there, which was funny, was one of those, drill and practice video math flashcards.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the simplest form of the characters in the Atari, and it just put up an answer, and you put in the answer and told you whether it's right or wrong. After a year or two, it got so embarrassing to put out, and I couldn't get the guy to change it, and it was one of our best sellers. So I actually changed the graphics and all that, and put a little pizzazz in it, and sent it to him. And I said, "Why don't you do something like this?" And he sent it back as his changes, and that's how it probably looks today. But it was the kind of thing you did because we thought that what we were doing was attracting people because we were offering prizes and going to publish their work. But the thing that attracted developers, at least half the time, was we told them we would give them an opinion of their program. So they would get a review. So if you submitted to Atari, to Apex, we would review your program and either accept it or reject it. Usually we would accept it with conditions because we started managing them, but we would never make changes other than that one I did on video math flashcards. And we started off, and I said to Fred, well, we're going to be dealing with mortals. We always talked about geeks and mortals, right?
Right.
We're dealing with mortals, and we're asking them to sign a Silicon Valley contract. That isn't going to work. I spent 5 weeks dealing with the lawyers at Atari to get the contract down to 2 pages. I wanted 1 page. And basically it said, when you submit this program to us, you give us the rights to publish it. And if you submit it to us, we promise to give you a review, even if we don't publish it. And that turned out to be the biggest hook, along with the Atari name, of course. and being published. And then what it turned out is Atari had done a fantastic job. There was this one guy who worked with the Atari user groups, and Atari had published a model, how you set up a user group, what the officers should be, what the charter should be, and that the purpose of the user groups was education and to produce better software. And if what you want to do is copy other people's software, please don't come to the meetings, right? And I have been to other user group meetings, including the Tandy, and all they were was, pirate groups. Only you had to have a disk drive so you could copy software. If you didn't, you weren't in the club. And I thought, but it wasn't anything like that at Atari. And because the user groups were set up so well, we used to get people to go out and talk to them. And one of the things that would happen is if you published with Apex and there was a problem, you found something odd, we would ask the systems people at Atari to give us an opinion. Sometimes we would connect these user groups to these systems people inside of Atari. And, so now you're talking to the Atari systems people, right? And they're treating you well. I mean, it was just the openness of the company was really incredible. And we got a command from on high that we needed copy protection. Everybody was worried about programs being stolen. And so Fred and I sat down and said, well, how should we define this? And he and I agreed that we would define the copy protection in terms of the skills of the people who would do the illegal copying. And we said right off, the unstoppable was a tech with a logical analyzer working in a computer shop could copy anything. It didn't matter what you did. So we weren't going to protect against that. And then there were the expert hackers, and then there were the third-party copy programs. And then at the most basic level was the Atari disk copy program, right?
Right.
Which nobody used because you could easily get something that would copy everything. And we defined our copy protection as you can't copy this with the Atari program protection, the Atari disk copy. And everybody said, but that's useless. I said, I don't know. Management seems happy with us. So we had to, and these kind of things went on with the publication lady and with reviewers. And I had varying reviewers. I had 3 to 6 reviewers. And basically, the documentation lady had done a wonderful job. She died of brain cancer after about a year. That was that was very sad. I remember playing handball with her, and she beat the crap out of me. She seemed healthy as hell, and then she died. But anyway, we put together this documentation package. So if you wanted to publish with us, you documented things in a certain way, and it wasn't real rigorous, but there was a format to it, right?
Sure.
So these people doing this were learning things they couldn't learn in other places. And after, I don't know how many quarters, a couple quarters, the software started rolling on because the Atari name was just flying all around the place, and anything Atari was doing was of interest. And some PR person passed out my name to a reporter saying, if you have a new idea that you'd like to submit to Atari, send it to this guy. I was like, no, we're just getting Apex up. I actually got an idea that was done in crayon by a kid in the UK.
Wow. Nice.
And so we had to write a polite letter back and say thanks, but no thanks. Another example of the friendliness is at Apex, we had our own customer support. So Lydia called in and she was having trouble reading a disk. And so the customer service person said, well, maybe you need to clean your disk. So a day or two later, she got another call and said, now my computer won't operate. I said, what happened? She said, well, I cleaned my disk and it stopped operating. I said, how did you clean your disk? Well, I put it in the dishwasher.
Wow, nice.
We're all going, oh, crap.
Yeah.
Who told her that? And back then, one of those discs cost about $1,000.
Disk drive? Sure.
Wow. And we sent her another disc.
Wow.
We felt so bad about it.
That's fine.
Anyway, pardon?
I wanted to quickly, this weekend, someone sent me a batch of 50 discs with source code and all sorts of stuff which hadn't been published yet, and these discs are filthy. So I literally spent this weekend opening the discs, removing the media, washing them with water and then isopropyl alcohol, putting them into clean sleeves, and then reading the data off them. So I spent my weekend washing floppy disks.
Oh, wow. That's funny. So maybe she had a good idea.
Maybe, yeah. It works pretty well. Please go ahead with your story.
Odd things happen. We kept getting this terrific software and the people to come and review. And then each reviewer would present the programs that they'd received they thought should be accepted. And I had one guy who had gotten a degree in law and a degree in geology, and he didn't like either of those. But he liked reviewing software. And every time he put a game out, everybody would groan. Another dull game from Gene. And invariably I'd publish it. Because there's a market for dull games, right?
Mm-hmm. What kind of dull game? Like little board games and things, or what? Give me an example. Yeah,
that kind of thing. When people say dull games, that's silly. And I'd say, what's the number one game played right now on PCs? And at the time, of course, it was Solitaire, because Microsoft gave it away, right? And there would be board games, things like that. Mind games, not action games. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem with E.T. later. There was a lot of mind to it, plus how you played it. Anyway, I was having a great time, and this kid from MIT, and he was a freshman, and he sent the first VT52 computer terminal emulator on the Atari, and he called it Chameleon. Mm-hmm. So he produced the first Chameleon, and that was, what do we call him? We used to call him Jack Palevich.
Jack Palevich, yeah.
Yes, Jack Palevich. Mm-hmm. When he sent us a second year, he sent us a cassette developing system where he would swap, when you had the cassette, you didn't have the regular disk OS. So he created an environment where you could develop for the cassette using the OS and then swap it out. Mm-hmm. I forget the name of that.
That was called Mantis.
Mantis, yes. Yes, a bug eater. And He originated that name. Jack's a creative guy. And the junior year, he sent us a C compiler. So I got hold of him. I said, Jack, there's no floating point in it. He said, why don't you do floating point? He says, Paul, you don't understand. He says, that's just tiny C I implemented on the Atari. He said, somebody will add the floating point to it. And sure enough, 3 months later, somebody sent us floating point. And as soon as we had the C compiler, the next day, the Atari systems people took it to their Data General Eclipse and made it run on their emulator and started developing Atari software in C.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then, of course, Jack's final senior project was Dandy, which was the forerunner of Gauntlet. Mm-hmm. In fact, the Atari arcade people just copied that into Gauntlet. And Jack called them on. Jack called them on it, but he didn't want to go to court, and they just gave him a free copy of Gauntlet, and he was happy with that.
Yeah.
He just wonderful young man, and he called me one day and said, well, he's graduating, and he thought he'd like to work for Atari. And I said, okay. I said, tell you what, I'll fly you out for an interview, but I know you don't want to work here. Developers don't want to work reviewing software, right? And I'll get you an interview with Atari Systems and with Alan Kay, who's running Atari research.
Right. The games research
and
lab.
He went to work for one of them. But later on, last I heard of him, he was at HP doing systems and interesting stuff and doing quite well. And so these kind of things just kept happening. So the software comes in, and guys from aerospace sent us a program, Natal Horoscope, right? And so a reviewer brought it in. Everybody, great, we got a Natal Horoscope. And being the guy running the place, I said, how do you know it works? What? How do you know it's a valid horoscope? What? I said, you know how a Natal Horoscope works?
Me, no.
The way you calculate it is there's a circle with 12 divisions, and they're each one of the signs. And then you compute where the planets are physically within those signs. That's how you read a horoscope.
Okay.
So I had an old friend, Kathy Lane, and I knew she liked horoscopes. And I said, how do I get this software checked out? And she said, I think I got the guy for you. And there was a guy running the computer labs, or senior. He was a senior in the computer labs at Stanford, and he did astrology. And we sent the program over to him, and he sent it back, and he said there's a bug in it. And what he had birth dates that he knew where the planets would be, and they would be in the corners of the little division that represented a sign. So if you miscalculated, it'd be over the line and be in the wrong sign. So the moon in Aquarius and all that, you can physically look at that on a horoscope. So then we looked deeper into it. We contacted the guy and said, you've got an error. And he checked back and said, no, I don't have an error. He said, you have a bug in the floating point. And we did. There was a bug in the floating point. So we told the systems people, because we worked with them, we'd get a piece of software in like Caverns of Mars, and we knew we weren't even going to have that for a while to go right mainline. So we passed some software over, including the Grass Valley Group had developed a home budgeting program that had a manual 2 inches thick on it. Everybody at Atari is going nuts. We can't publish this. And some guy running one of the his job was running a factory on the border in Mexico. He worked for somebody, and the guy who did family home entertainment, and anyway, he worked in one of those. And he just did it so his wife could do the budget. Since he designed it for his wife, it's a nice program, So we cared a lot about programs, how they looked. On games, we over time came up with, if it's a single player game, we'd like it multiplayer, and vice versa. And by the way, we want a baby steps up through expert levels, and we want to be able to restart programs. So all this, you work your way 2 hours, you're up to the middle level, and then you're dead, and you got to go back to the beginning. We thought that was too frustrating. And so, and later on when the Easter egg showed up in, what the hell is that program on the VCS and had the first Easter egg in it?
Adventure.
And the guy had put in a message to his girlfriend, right?
I think he just put in his initials or something.
And it was, anyway, there was something in there. Well, before that, a precursor to that is there were gigantic scans. They were like, 10 feet wide, 12 feet high of the chip designs that were on walls in Atari. and you could see the names of the developers in there. So the idea of doing something inside of a program probably started with the chip designers. And anyway, so we also told people to put Easter eggs in programs. And I always thought one of my favorite programs was Galahad, because the guy had 350 some rooms in Atari 800. It was just unbelievable. And of course, he went on to be a fairly famous game designer.
Right.
And so that kind of stuff would come in, and he thought he was going to win. That was the second year he was going to win the grand prize, but of course the typing program won a typo attack. I still think that's the best typing tutor out there.
Yeah?
That was a kid from Minnesota, and his dad's a college professor.
Mm-hmm.
And when he designed the program and wanted to put little ditties in, his dad suggested he use Gilbert and Sullivan ditties, because Dad knew those were out of the public domain. So, there's this kind of knowledge base behind all this stuff that you just, it's hard to see, but it's just, the stuff just keeps coming by you, and stories like that. So what are some of the other things? We had geology programs, and the guy who did those was the biggest pain in the ass as an author. And we wanted to publish him, but he would not change a thing. And as much as I hated him, I would publish him because I had a rule. If there ain't others like it out there, we'll publish it if it works.
All right.
And that was one of my criteria. Although we did publish one program, which I renamed Quarks on, and nobody could ever figure out how you want it, but people love to play it. So, strange stuff like that kept happening. Everybody used to say, what kind of program do you want? I said, give me another flight simulator. The 747 flight simulator was a huge seller, but it was really crude,
Mm-hmm.
But, my prejudice was if it's sold and people liked it, we're not selling my taste. We're selling what people like, And early on in the game, we had to test our software on the European machines, particularly PAL. If you could run on PAL, apparently you could run on CCAM. I think that's true,
Okay.
which is the French stuff. And the problem with PAL, it had a slower scan line. So programs that depended on their timing by taking V-blank would not necessarily run at the same speed or run right. And so sometimes you had to adjust how you moved the program along. Anyway, we needed somebody to do that testing. And I went out and I went to a computer club, and I said, anybody, if you own a whole lot of games, you got a whole lot of software and you understand all the software on the Atari, I'm interested in you. However, don't bring any of that stuff into the company. Anything we have, we buy, And this guy came out in a wheelchair and he was all excited. He said, I never thought about getting a job. Well, as it turned out, I found a better candidate and I hired them. So a little while later, that was one kind of test. A little while later, the PAL CCAM stuff came in, and Fred said to me, that guy in the wheelchair, he said, knew all the games? I said, yeah. He said, we need somebody to test on CCAM. So we hired Mike Downey. And suddenly I'm a hero on Atari because I hired a handicapped guy. And everybody said, gee, why'd you hire him? I said, because he was the best candidate. What do you think? And so, you make some allowances, but all those Silicon Valley buildings are one story without even a step into them, right? They ever have a flood there, some of those places will really be in trouble. And so there would be computer shows, and Atari would have a big, kind of booth, right, or area. And there was always a system for the Apex stuff. So one day I went to Mike and I said, it's your turn, Mike. He says, what's that? I said, it's your turn to go to a trade show. He says, where's it at? He says, it's Atlanta. How will I get there? And I said, figure it out. So if you can't, come back to me, but you work on it. He came back. He was really excited because he found out that there were all kind of accommodations allowed him to fly and rental cars. He already had a car that was already all rigged up, and they had those kind of cars for rent. And he sort of turned out to be the hit of the show in Atlanta because there weren't many places that hired handicap at the time, I guess. So anyway, you're a hero for odd things. And I was just doing my job. And Mike was a really good reviewer, and we hired him because he owned every game for the Atari, which meant he was a pirate, but he didn't bring any of them to work, and his contributions were really good because he understood games. Some things like Caverns of Mars or, what was that one, Breakout? Shootout, Breakaway, The Robber.
Oh, Getaway.
Getaway, yes. We got some criticism for our immorality for publishing that, but I thought it was a hell of a game.
That was a great game. Just for because you're playing the part of the bad guy, trying to.
Yeah, stealing. Oh, go away. And we got some. Program that taught you how to finger spell for the deaf kind of thing. It really wasn't Amazlan, but we thought it was a start. So over the time, lots of different stuff came in, and we'd publish every month. And other ways we ran things were we were going to have these monthly prizes, right? I said, okay, how will we judge them? And I said, well. He said, can we use the reviewers? I said, no, they're too expert. I said, tell you what, I think they can nominate it, but we got to find somebody else to judge them. Fred being Fred, and Fred was notorious for breaking glass with his peers, and he'd go into a meeting and tell the truth, and all these other people would turn white, right? I've never heard a untruth out of Fred's mouth. I worked with him for 3 years, not even an implication, right? And we decided that you could be a judge. We would set up, we'd get an area somewhere in Atari, which was easy to do, and we would set up usually we had, 20 computers or so. We would have 5 finalists or 6 that the reviewers would nominate. And then you could come in and be a judge if you were a VP or higher through Atari, or if you were higher than Fred in the software group. So now it became a regular event. Every quarter, all these executives and senior people would come through and judge software and vote and get a free lunch. More than one way to win friends, Frank. And so we would pass out the prizes. And as time went on, the prizes were a fixed amount of dollars of stuff in the computer store.
Right.
Well, after a while, we had authors who had won so much and prizes had dropped so much thanks to the folks at Commodore. What was his name? Jack
Tramiel.
Pardon?
Jack Tramiel.
Tramiel, yeah, the old Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found out he just ran everything by the pencil. Later on, when I was at Mindset, our manufacturing guy had worked for Tramiel at Commodore, and he said that every time the numbers were wrong, Tramiel would get a listing of everybody by salary in various departments, and he would go through and cross off all the guys making more than like $45,000 a year, and all the women making more than $35,000 until he was back to his number. So you never knew when you were going to catch a bullet at Commodore.
Jeez.
And Jesus, later on when I was at Mindset, I visited Commodore back east, and I'd just been to Apple. And you've been inside Apple, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very rich environment,
Sure.
graphically and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Commodore's factory looked like something out of the 50s. I mean, it was like going into black and white. I felt like I was in an old movie. And it was being run by two crooks who picked it up. And they were bleeding this public company. And they had their home office in Bermuda. And they would they had a 727. They would fly to London for 4 days and to New York or to America for 4 days and leave. As long as they were no more than 4 days in the country, the tax people couldn't touch them. Or the stock, the FTC, whatever it is. And they just ran the Amiga into the ground. And I thought the great machine of the era wasn't the Atari 800, it was the Amiga. That was just fantastic. But crooks got a hold of it, and it's long gone, right?
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how Tramiel ran manufacturing. So we had, Dale's wife, one of her assistants was married to one of the Atari VCS programmers.
Okay.
And he's this big guy, gigantic guy, about 6'5", and overweight. Could never control his weight. And in order to manufacture cassettes, we brought him in, and we had to research, and we had to find cassette players that could be controlled externally. And I don't know, it's Panasonic or one of the better cassette players, and he designed that you could sit down in an Atari, and this is how we manufactured our tapes. The guy would type something in, and the machines would all open, right? And he'd go down and put a tape in each one of them, press buttons, it would shut, and it would put a master tape in, and he'd make 12 copies. And our cassettes were the only one that didn't have the shift that comes from one of those mass production machines that run faster. As we did them in real time. So we took a lot of care in what we did. And we tried to keep the price down. We had a rough rule. It was going to cost $50 or more. We didn't want to publish it. We probably couldn't put the effort in it would take for that kind of a program. And it was just outside our market. I mean, I think our average price back then was $17 for a piece of software. And if you remember those days, that was really cheap in comparison. So my absolutely worst programmer to deal with to publish wrote Dog Days. Okay,
Gray Chang.
Gray.
Yeah.
And Gray is just this kind of tie-in-a-knot guy. Was convinced the world wasn't treating him right. And I loved the program because women liked it. Women love to play Dog Days. We kept saying, what kind of software do women like? What can we produce that will bring in women, girls and women? And it was a real task. And some of our reviewers were ladies, of course, but not that many developers were. The guys from aerospace that produced the astrology program, we kept trying to say, well, give us one you can run your daily horoscope in. And they said, no, we're in enough trouble for publishing this. and if we do that, all these scientists around here are going to be bad at it. But what happened, so rewinding a little, remember we took up this book full of tricks that the programmers used.
Sure, De Re Atari, which was published by APX as well.
Right. Well, amongst other things were all the places you could vector into the ROM. And you know the problem with that, don't you?
Everything changed with the 1200 XL?
when you create a new ROM writing from scratch, none of that stuff will vector in.
Mm-hmm.
So when the 1200 came out, everybody was screaming and yelling. All of the classic programs wouldn't run on it. And we kept telling them when they did the 1200, said, you've got to use this ROM. Well, you could never get Bothersher and his crew to listen to us when they built that machine. I worked for Roger later and liked him, but they, PhD from Michigan and, CEO type, likable guy. But that's why the 1200 OS turned bad, was because all of the best software, like the flight simulator and all that, vectored into the ROM. And that was a side effect of Daewoo Atari. And, I put together a course for Mindset to teach programmers how to program it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mindset had a bit blitter in it that was taken right out of Foley Van Dam's book on fundamental computer graphics from University of Rochester. I'm sure RPI. I'm sure you've read it. It's classic, right?
Oh, of course. It's right here on my desk.
Yes. And you know what a bit blit is?
I know what a blitter is, like from the Amiga. That's about as far as it goes for me.
Well, memory is one long string. So when you put it up on a screen, how do you do a rectangle? Well, you do it by pieces. You pick up a piece at a time out of the long string, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you want to move that image somewhere else, you got to move it a piece at a time. And a bit blitter is putting stuff on the screen, and when it hits a certain limit, it jumps whatever the length of the line is.
Okay.
So it puts the lines together and moves pictures around is what it does. But I put together 4 or 5 basically textbooks on graphics and computers, and went around teaching people how to use the Mindset, and told them this is what it is, blitter and all that, and pass out the manuals. And we had these gigantic prototype machines, about sheet metal, about 3 feet high. You should try flying around the country in a couple of those and seats beside you. And I never did know how to program it, which was funny. But I knew programmers that if I gave them the manuals, here's the instruction set, here's how you use it. But I couldn't duplicate it Mindset what we had at Atari. We just didn't have the name.
Mm-hmm.
At Mindset. We were brand new, and we came out with a premium computer when about 1,000 cheapy PCs hit the market, literally. At one time, there were 1,200 PC manufacturers, which was the same number of cars being manufactured in the U.S. before the Depression hit. And it was kind of like that. So anyway, getting back to Atari and what happened to them, Rev 2.0 of Atari in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what Ray Kasar's biggest contribution was to Atari?
Tell me.
Well, he was, and we used to call him his nickname was the Egyptian Road Merchant, but he was he worked for Spring Made Mills.
Okay.
He used to run ads, a buck well spent on a Spring Made sheet, and was considered racy for its day. But anyway, he was a salesman. And he came in, and he and Bushnell really got along, as you well know. But Ray came in and looked at us and said, what should we do with this? How should we package it? And Ray said, put it in a point of sale box.
Mm-hmm.
And a point of sale is a box that tells you everything on the box you need to know to buy it. And all you need is a credit card and a shaved ape to take your card, and then you bought something, right?
Right.
So they did a point of sale box. I think that was in '78 for the VCS, and Sears carried it, and that's when Atari took off. So Ray did that, and no matter what Bushnell said, Warner's wasn't going to touch him, because he'd done that. And have you ever met him?
No.
He's always immaculately dressed. Always had, tailor-made suits. And he always wore his shirts with the button-down collars that were turned, with the stick been through them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was always funny, the guys who worked around the headquarters would wear the same clothes as him. And anyway, Bushnell left. And when I got to Atari, let's see, I was 81. And sometime in that year, there was a worldwide survey, AC Nielsen or somebody, maybe the the TV ratings people, Nielsen did it.
Mm-hmm.
No, the ones out of Cincinnati. Anyway, the top most recognizable names in the world were Coke, McDonald's, Muhammad Ali, and Atari. That's the kind of name recognition we had.
Yeah.
And up to then, every game that came out of Atari was high quality. If it had Atari label on it, you knew you were getting something good.
Yeah.
And everybody believed that. And 83 was the year that brought in a fine recession. And there was a point where computer games just stopped selling at retail. But meanwhile, Warner's stock was being driven by Atari's revenue. So in order to keep Atari's revenue up, they were stuffing the channel. You know what that is?
No, I don't know what that means.
Common in manufacturing for retail is in order to show sales, you ship more to the channel than they're ordering.
Okay.
Betting they're going to get a sale. So they started stuffing the channel. And Atari had people called up the channel, asked them how they were going, and some of them were saying, you're sending us too much stuff, and that was fed back. But management couldn't hear it because it was keeping the stock going. So then the most popular game around was Pac-Man. And above all, Atari needed Pac-Man for the VCS. So they got the rights to it, they sent it over. And you know how software development goes. First you make something work, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so the guy ported it to the VCS. I don't think he ported the code per se. I think it was on a proprietary machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's just about as easy to look at it and clone it, but then you look inside the machine too to see what it's doing. And when he first got it running, and it was playable, the internal nickname for it, and I played it, was Flicker Man. Okay?
Yeah.
And it came time there was pressure big time to publish it. Coming down from Warner and coming down from Kasar, of course, his bonus depended on it. And so they published it. And they sold something like 5 million copies.
Yeah.
Because all those people loved Atari and had VCS and knew it was going to be a good name, and it wasn't.
Right.
It just wasn't up to the quality. It was playable, but it wasn't like Pac-Man is now on the VCS, right?
Sure.
But and then they decided through the time they're paying too much to these VCS developers and royalties, and started putting them on salary. And so, of course, what do these guys do? They leave and start their own games. I think Activision was some Atari people and some others.
Yeah, and Magic. Yeah.
Yeah, Magic and that kind of thing. And so as we're going through the year, the guy running Warner's, guy out of New York, who used to got rich off of funeral homes. He was the guy who died of prostate cancer. Do you remember his name?
No, not right now.
Anyway, well, good Jewish boy. He married a Jewish girl whose dad had a chain of funeral parlors in Manhattan. And the funeral parlors all had parking lots. And he figured out that that's valuable property and turned it into multi-millions, right? And a really nice guy. And I didn't meet these big guys too much. And he had dinner or something with Spielberg and bought the rights to E.T.
Right.
And Spielberg got 24 or 28 million out of it. That was his price.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a developer VCS working on it. And he was a top developer, and he came up with a different kind of game. When I first saw it, I thought it was not a very good game. And it turns out if you understand what it's doing, it's a good game. It's a little heady, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then it comes down, when are we going to publish E.T.? When are we going to publish E.T.? And the guy had basically done a prototype. But since it was a heady game, it didn't have to be all that much action. And they made 6 million of those, I believe. Now, I can't vouch for these numbers, but I think they're approximately right. And when that went in the channel, all the people bought. Pac-Man went to the store and looked at E.T., and none of them bought it, right? Fool me once, that routine.
Right.
And so now you've got all these Pac-Man, you've got all these E.T. games, and we're reaching about September of '83, and Atari had their own mini CES, Computer Electronics Show, in a big hangar in Sunnyvale there, one of those Lockheed places.
Mm-hmm. And
you go inside, and it was all set up like a trade show and that, and all of the distributors and retailers came in, and they were looking forward to some good news from Atari. And, what was the first spreadsheet? We published it at the Atari.
VisiCalc. And,
VisiCalc.
Yeah. And then there was SynCalc on the Atari, which was by Synapse.
Well, no, Atari published VisiCalc.
Okay.
And I took a little class in it. So Fred said, you've got to do a budget, and here's a template from accounting. So I put the template in VisiCalc and printed it out and gave it to Fred, and he said, how did you do this? Well, I printed it on VisiCalc. Show me how. So Fred turned his budget into software, and he said, how did you do this? He said, I did it in VisiCalc. And the software guys turned in, all the software did that. When they turned it in, next thing we knew, we got because we had these CD duplicators, diskette duplicators, they sent us down a template, and we reproduced, 1,200 of them, and everybody got to do it on VisiCalc. So sometimes you start a ball rolling.
Nice.
And you never know why it keeps rolling. But anyway, getting back to that, 1, 2, 3 came out, right? Mitch Kapoor, who did add-ins for VisiCalc, came out with what I said was VisiCalc 2.0. That's what 1, 2, 3 was.
Lotus 1, 2, 3?
Yes, I never understood why the VisiCalc guys didn't, play some games in court on that. But maybe they have my distaste for litigation. Anyway, one of the whiz-bangs in headquarters, one of the numbers guy got a PC, a $5,500 IBM PC. Remember those?
Sure.
10 megabyte disk. And he did a calculation that Atari was giving up too much margin to the distribution channel. And the big news at the show was the deal had changed, and they were getting about 5% less. And they're desperate to sell stuff, right?
Sure.
Now their margins are getting cut. And I tell you, that was the unhappiest trade show I've ever been to. And just to add to it, I had an allergic reaction in the middle of it and went into anaphylactic shock. But
Yikes.
luckily was able to tell the gal, they had a little room off to the side, and they're opening my shirt looking for a heart attack. And I'm barely able to gasp out, it's an allergic attack. And they called in, the guy gave me epinephrine, and 20 minutes later, you're okay. But meanwhile, some fool started a rumor in Atari that I'd had a heart attack. Even told my wife that. You can imagine how she felt. So, adventures of Atari, right?
Yikes. Yeah.
So anyway, all these people went back home and looked at all their inventory. The guy's saying, boss, we got all this Atari stuff. What should we do with it? Well, the electronics industry is so fragile, or so, it ages so quickly that the way you do deals with retail is that you eat the returns. So retail can return anything to a manufacturer they want. And the following month, something like $65 million worth of Atari stuff showed up at the loading dock.
Wow.
They shipped it all back. So now Atari's, about 6 feet underwater with all this merchandise. So the same guy, I think, got out his Lotus 123 again, and they figured out they were going to have a fire sale. And so carts started appearing in retail, $5 for a cart, where you paid $30 and $40 for them.
Mm-hmm.
So they destroyed the imputed value of the product. Nobody's going to pay more than $2 or $3 for a cart. I mean, were you around then? There were bins full of carts.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what ended up in that dump. Now they had all these bins and they couldn't sell them, and they decided to bury them. But somehow the rumor started that Atari was burying AT out there when they were just burying all the carts they couldn't sell. So now the place is falling apart, and Kasar gets fired, and the chain smoker from Philip Morris came in and sat at his desk smoking, trying to figure out what to do. It was really a strange place to be in as it was falling apart.
Yeah.
So I took a job with Mindset because they wanted somebody to, work with software developers. And boy, did I make a mistake. Bill Gates admired the software development program at Atari. I should have gone to Microsoft and said, yeah, I helped develop that. And I published this and that. No, I went with Mindset, but never mind. I mean, we all miss our chances.
Yeah.
So everybody said, how can you leave Atari? And I said, well, first rat off the sinking ship usually survives. But what I did miss was a hell of a, what do they give you when you lay you off? A separation.
Uh-huh.
What is it? What do they call it?
What's the word? Yeah, they lay you off. They give you a cash to go away. I know the word. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've never gotten one of those. Anyway, I went with Mindset. And Fred and I tried to start a separate Apex. Did a plan. Fred did it for VCs. I don't think Fred's worse at selling than I am, I think. He actually printed his business plan on an Atari. But, of course, I always thought the 800 is one of the best keyboards and word processors I ever had, Atari writer. But anyway, VCs did not believe at that time that average users out there in a computer could produce better software than you could get in the Silicon Valley from the professionals. Some years later, Apple showed them how wrong they were. Have you ever figured out how you can publish 1 million apps or 500,000? And how do you find anything in those 1 million apps, supposedly for the Mac and all that, or the iPhone.
Well, that's that's the issue with the App Store, isn't it? There's so many apps, and you search, and what you want might be out there, but how are you going to find it with so much to sift through?
Yeah, well, one of the things we did was, the reviews in the Apex manual were pretty straightforward. They weren't fluff. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we said the flight simulator, it's an interesting program. It's a difficult program, but you might find it interesting. That was our review.
So yeah, you guys didn't oversell it, and you'd be like, the manual's good, or and this game has some quirks. So why did, for instance, that flight simulator program sell so well when you weren't overselling it in the catalog?
It was the only one out there.
Ah, there you go.
Until Bruce Artwick came along. Mm-hmm. The geek from the University of Illinois.
Right.
Ever meet him?
No.
Probably not. Difficult. He's reclusive. I've talked to him on the phone. He got a degree in aviation engineering and majoring and specializing in flight simulators. And I think the Apple II flight simulator might have been his master's thesis. And that's a whole separate story. Which has to do with PCs and all that, and you're not interested in that. So what else do I know about Atari? I went to a reunion of Atari people. I remember one gal saying, the untold story at Atari was the sex and drugs, the cocaine and sex. Well, I sure missed that. That was part of the currency for the sales crew, I think. But that was the Silicon Valley at the time. That wasn't peculiar to Atari. And the guy running publications there had, what the hell was his name? He had done Dope and Dan, the underground comic about the guy in the army.
Yeah, I've interviewed him.
Yeah, hell of a guy. And he set some very high standards. So when you got an Atari, even our catalog was really high quality, right?
Yes, absolutely.
He set standards for quality on everything published there. And then one day he got a message from New York. He was having a printer out of New York referred to him by a guy from New York who ran Atari Warner Communications. And after the third chance to turn them down, he gave him a contract and then left. But it was that kind of thing happening, the mentality from the movie community. Mm-hmm. The joke was that if you went to the Far East and went through Hong Kong, you would get 2 suits and 2 shots of penicillin. And, there's just all kinds of that kind of stuff at another level. But being geeks, we didn't see that much of it. But anyway, Atari broke trust with its customers. It broke trust with its channels. It broke trust with its developers. Gee, why did it collapse? God bless Hollywood.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful place, and the people in it were high quality. They really cared about users and what they were doing. And we produced some wonderful stuff, I thought. I didn't produce it personally. It was just part of the process.
Sure.
But, it was some of the most fun and the hardest time I ever had working. It was really a bear to work. Well, it was funny, when I came to Atari, I had gotten to the point, I'd learned some bad habits at home. We used to have card games at home that ended in riots, okay? And so, literally. And I got so I could play games, and I could play ping pong and shuffleboard, various things very well. But I'd get all pissed off at how I played. I would get mad when I won. So I thought, this is nuts. I'm just going to stop playing games. So then one day I hired at Atari, and part of my job was playing games. which was sort of interesting in its way. I'm trying to think of all the stuff there. I think in the time I was there were 250 packages published approximately.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
247.
Yeah.
Something like that. And, then I met the, what's that funny programming language that's extensible?
Fig Fourth.
Pardon?
Are you talking about Fourth?
Fourth, yes.
Yeah.
I met the fourth cult in the Silicon Valley. And when they found out I was looking for a fourth interpreter, right?
Mm-hmm.
To publish, because developers, fourth was perfect for an 8-bit machine. Because it, I had this rough rule of thumb, if machine code ran at a unit of 1, fourth would run between 5 and 10, and basic would run at about 50, right?
Right, yeah.
Something like that. I pulled it out of the air, but nobody ever challenged it. So it's probably an approximate truth. So I met this fourth group, and they were an absolute cult. And they were giving me all lectures, and there was some religion about it. To this day, you meet some fourth people that are strange, and if you meet them outside the valley. And there was a guy who'd worked for Data General, and he produced languages for them. And he did a fourth port for the Atari. And being a software professional working for Data General, there was some quality to it, right? So he sent it to me, and I stopped talking to the fourth people in the Silicon Valley. And Jesus, just like a balloon went up when we published it. Everybody loved it except the fourth people.
Huh.
A little while later, I ran into a group to remind me of it, and that was the BSD people. When I got into Unix, they were kind of purists, and all of that. So anyway, that was sort of my 3 years at Atari.
Nice.
Can't even remember that many pieces of software. Oh, Gray Chang, Dog Days.
Yeah.
Gray was unhappy. He just thought we weren't treating it right, and he wanted to take his program somewhere else and publish it. I said, go ahead. It's a non-exclusive contract. And which I always told people, our contract's non-exclusive. And everybody said, what? Why don't you want an exclusive? I said, you don't understand. If I have a non-exclusive contract with you, none of the exclusive people will sign you. So I was, but you can do what you want. You can sell it off your, people used to complain about our royalty, and I used to say, go to a flea market and sell it off the back of your station wagon. The royalty's the royalty. I know it's not much, but it's standard pretty much. We paid 10% of the net sale price.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, Gray came to me and I said, okay, I'm tired of talking to you. I didn't say that to him. I said, give me some time. I got a hold of one of the lawyers. I said, I want to give this program back to this guy, and I just want to release it to him, terminate the contract. So he gave me a piece of paper, about 2 pages. I gave it to Gray, and he went away. And the marketing people, they kept coming trying to give me advice, like, what are you publishing this month? I said, well, it depends what's dropped out of the mailbox.
So I want to talk about that mailbox. I found some stats that said that your staff reviewed maybe 2,400 program submissions at the time you were there, and you talked about that table where you're sitting around the table voting on what should be submitted. And so that seems, I'm interested in talking about that. And you said you had, I saw that you had 7 votes at that table. How did that work?
Everybody had 1 vote, and I had 1 vote more than everybody at the table. I was in charge.
Okay.
And we'd have a discussion. What were the ins and outs? And I had some rules. And, do you know it works? Have you tested it? The flight simulator, I wouldn't publish it until I took it myself, put it on autopilot, and was able to land the damn thing. I said, I'm not publishing this if we can't land it. And the only thing I ever published that I didn't know the thing of was Quarkson. I still don't understand what that was. But I came up with that name with 2 X's, and it sold like crazy. Names are funny, you know. And, you know, I'd get very interested if something was very different. Hadn't seen it before. And
for example?
Well, we got an early sort of fantasy baseball game. We were starting to get sports simulators, and I was very interested in putting those out. But that happened just as I was leaving. Shortly after I left, guess who showed up at Atari wanting to be published? Great Chang. He'd made the rounds and been unhappy with everybody who published him, decided we were the best. It was very strange. Unfortunately, he arrived at a bad time.
Right.
You know, the guy was just... I only met a couple of programmers that had reclusive personalities. The guy who did Caverns of Mars was just... He took shyness to a new high.
Tell me about
like that.
Tell me about that, because I tell you, I spoke with him on the phone briefly, and he won't be interviewed, and he sounded shy. Yeah, just reclusive. I mean, just in a 4-minute call, I was just like, wow, I'm never going to get to talk to this guy.
Yeah, that's him. We had an event once, and he went out and sat in his car and played on a computer. And he was totally reclusive. Gray was always unhappy. I'm sure he's unhappy to this day with whatever he's doing. And then whoever did that geology program, we did isopleth mapping. Do you remember that one?
Sure, yeah. I've interviewed those guys.
That guy was impossible. I got along with him. I really liked him. He was interesting to talk to. He just absolutely would not let anybody touch anything he wrote, a line of code, or change a thing. But since he was the only one given this geology program, why we published him. There's an example. You know, it was kind of a dull program. I said, I don't know. It doesn't cost us much to have anything on the shelf, you know. And if people like it, they can order it. And so that was the other thing. Our cost of inventory wasn't a big item. We sort of made to order. We had a manufacturing process pretty much kept up with demand. But we would sit around and have discussions, and somebody gave us a program that you're going through this hallway, and there were left and right turns, and music was playing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy who did, I think the guy who did Galahad wrote it. And the way you played it, when you got to the end, the music stopped. That was the game.
Huh.
Everybody's fascinated with it. I said, has anybody reached the end? No. I said, they were not publishing. I'm not going to answer the phone on how you play that game. If you can't tell me how to play the game, we're not going to answer. You know? So that would be an example of things so there's only 1 or 2 programs I ever vetoed. And I generally overrode their vote to publish something that was kind of dull but was unique. So, you know, you might get... I was looking for stuff in the sciences and education. Mm-hmm. Never did find anything that impressed me in education. But people liked it, so...
Can you remember what you vetoed, or what kind of things you vetoed?
Well, a game you couldn't reach the end of was one. And I had vetoed it. And we didn't have any software, and everybody wanted the flight simulator out there. And I refused to publish it until it could be landed. And the only reason we published it is I figured out how to land it. But, well, we got a lot of repetition on drill and practice. And you'd get, every once in a while, you'd get something in that we would like that would be for education. And one of my reviewers, we always had to have a professional educator look at the education stuff. They had to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this one gal saying something. And said, no, she said, all the kids will do is they'll poke around till they get through, but they won't learn anything. I said, right. We're not publishing that. And, they didn't, first of all, my reviewers had pretty good judgment. They didn't bring stuff before the rest of everybody. They want to face the other reviewers and me with something they didn't think was any good, although I kept encouraging them, if it works, show it. If you can show that it works and it's just not a repetition of something we have, show it and we'll see what everybody thinks.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes stuff would get voted down for that.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly I'd override something that everybody liked that they couldn't publish. So, well, the astrology programs.
Mm-hmm.
How did you test it? Well, I entered my date. How do you know it's right? Somebody tell me how to test this program and we'll publish it. I know we want an astrology program, but I don't want to hear from a whole lot of people who know about astrology that we publish a piece of crap.
Right.
It was, that sort of view.
I'm curious about, you mentioned you encouraged Easter eggs, which is pretty rare for that time. I mean, Atari in general would super discourage Easter eggs from its professional software. Can you talk about that a little more?
Well, I think there's some in Galahad. Although, God, there's so much in Galahad, I'm not sure whether it's an Easter egg or not. Yeah, there's some rooms in Galahad you don't expect to find, that kind of thing. Well, nobody paid much attention to us. What was Atari at the time? Was it a $50 million company, something like that, or 100? And Apex was a $1 million operation. We were just a little pet side project that occasionally came up with a big winner. Oh, and then what's the great educational program by Seymour Papert? Logo.
Right.
So Alan Kay called a meeting, and these people had created this CPM box that you would attach to an Atari and you could run Logo.
Mm-hmm.
And the question was, should we be putting that out? And people went around the room and expressed their opinions. And Fred said, well, I understand that Logo's just a, what do you call it? It's a vector program, you're just drawing by...
Turtlegraphic.
Turtlegraphic. He said, we already got one. Why don't we just rename Pilot? Everybody went, we can't do that. I thought, why not? So it's my turn. I said, well, first of all, I'm not interested in a $500 wart to attach to the Atari to run Logo. I could see the two developers there were very distressed at that statement.
Mm-hmm.
I said, here's what I'd like to know. I said, my understanding is that Logo is an extensible language. So my question is there a subset of Logo that will fit inside of an Atari cart that I can put into an Atari 400 for $50 and spread Logo through the schools? And the room went dead quiet. And the meeting ended there. Have you ever interviewed Bonnie Humphreys?
No, I've not. She's on my list, but I don't think I've spoken with her yet.
She got all of the languages for the Atari 800. She managed the language developers. What a fantastic woman. Wonderful. I used her at DataQuest when I was there to put together a 1-week class on relational databases for Japanese clients. She just couldn't believe how she got things done. She found an outfit in Montreal called Lisp Computer Systems,
mm-hmm.
Incorporated, LCSI. And they developed, talk about geeks and skill, they developed logo. And they generated the code using Lisp for the Atari 800. And they got a complete version of logo to fit on an Atari cart that we put in the computer. And that happened as the ship is sinking, you know?
Yeah.
But it's the kind of thing you could get done at Atari. So Alan Kay, Bonnie, Fred, me, all kinds of people around there just figuring out how to solve problems and get things done, you know?
Awesome.
And a lot of my reviewers, they had great suggestions for software, really could manage software. The look you saw in Apex software after about 6 months to a year was the end result of the reviewers working with the developers and with pubs to get product out, you know. And I thought for the time we produced really good software at a really good price. And probably one of the best things I've ever done. So I wandered to many other places from there, but yeah, watching that place go down it really hurt.
I bet.
Just to think of something that good, that many good people. And of course, they suffered the problem of too many type A's. When you have too high of a requirement, you know, people have to jump through too high of a hoop, you know, have a 1600 SAT, that kind of thing. You end up with a company full of type A's. And they're incredibly competitive because they all want to stand out in the room, right? And so there are only two things. You either start a new project to win notice, or you politic. And then as it goes further down, they make the mistake of believing because they're a huge success, and they're not even sure why they're a success, but it's because they're smart. So you get too many brains inside of a company. It happened at various companies like, what was that graphics computer workstation where all the graphics guys came out of?
Silicon Graphics?
Yes. A friend of mine, Maria DeGraff, she was getting a PhD working with Teller. She wanted to figure out how to travel in time. Little Latina from Santa Maria, right? Or from the coast.
Wow.
And she ended up at IBM working on what was their relational database? Anyway, she helped develop the first relational database. Maria was consulting at Silicon Graphics, and she said to him, look, all this stuff you're doing can be done on chips. People are going to be producing chips on boards. They're going to be producing boards that'll drive you out of business. So they laughed her out of the room, except for the 3 or 4 guys who each went off and started a board company. You know. And but that's what happened to Silicon Graphics. They suffered from too much smartness and hubris and all that. Yeah. I thought it would catch Apple, but Apple has a strange quality that every so many years they're going to fail and then they come back. It used to be about a 3-year cycle. I don't know what crash is going to come next, but I don't know how many more phones you can sell.
Yeah.
And how far they keep ahead. But one of the things I learned as a market researcher is never predict failure. You'll be quoted forever.
Speaking of quoting you, I have a quote from you from People magazine in 1983. You were talking about dealing with the programmers, the APX programmers. And you said something I really liked. You said, we're dealing with artists. They are authors and they are treated as such. You know they are artists because their works all have emotional content. That, to me, is the definition of an artist, one who transmits information with an emotional content.
Yeah, interesting. That's my definition of art.
That's just some, I don't know, heady thinking about computer programmers. I don't know how many people would not think of them as artists. They're just people who are creating code or whatever. So,
well, they do extraordinary things. Jesus, in the Valley, you meet people that are unbelievable. I mentioned John Sokol, Sokol.
Hmm.
He runs some incubator and is trying to develop stuff. He's missed the golden ring a few times. He was in LA, and back when, remember when you couldn't get video to move on your computer?
Yeah.
John was doing full motion video. And he got a call, and Tim Leary had terminal cancer. And he wanted somebody to set him up on the network so he could communicate with people from his bedroom on his last 3 to 6 months. And John set it up. So some years later, he gets a call from Arthur C. Clarke. Same thing. He's in, Sri Lanka, and he's dying. And he wants to set up this network. And he paid for it by giving John the movie rights to a short story called The 15 Billion Names of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And John's never been able to get it produced. And I was thinking about that the other day. How would you do it animated? He ought to find somebody to do it animated first or something.
Hmm.
But interesting, John can do all that kind of stuff, but taking the step to produce a final artistic product isn't what he does. He does the system stuff, that kind of thing. But, look at one of the things I joke about the App Store, but that's all average people looking at something, and they've got something they love, like an Atari 800. There are the tools there to do stuff with it,
Mm-hmm.
and they start fooling around, and next thing they know, it's just like... what's that Jeff Bridges movie from Disney?
Tron?
Tron. They get sucked into the computer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to walk into people's offices, and they'd be staring at a computer, and he'd turn to look at me, and I'd say, be careful, you can lose your soul in there. Yeah, I used to do that at Data Quest. Anyway, I repeated that on an interview once on a kids program on Saturday morning. But basically they're artists, and they were producing. Most of them were producing stuff for end users,
right?
And even John Palevich, my God. Dandy. What a wonderful program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet he didn't do any of that afterwards. He went into systems and very deep stuff. I don't know if he did chip design or what. So he's one of the ultimates. He was quite a guy. Did you ever interview him?
Yes, I have. Yep. It was
Still a nice guy. I knew him.
He's still a great guy. Yep.
Yeah. Incidental player, although he changed the Atari landscape with the software he produced.
Yeah.
Particularly the C compiler changed things. But, C, what a strange language. If you want to see how strange C is, try writing a business program and a report in C.
No, thank you. I'm good.
I produced a decision table program, which is fast and it doesn't do trees. What it does is it turns a decision table, yes and no's, into ones and zeros, then adds them. So at the end of doing the logical add, true or false, you should have only one true rule that executes extraordinarily fast. It sort of does what Prolog does.
Mm-hmm.
I keep meaning to document it so somebody can release it and get it out there, but I've never done it. And I have written some software at times. As I said, a word processor and a spreadsheet in COBOL,
Mm-hmm.
of all things.
But you didn't write anything for the Atari, did you?
No.
What do you do today?
I drive for Uber.
Really?
Live in Sacramento.
Huh.
Yeah. Living
Nice.
on small retirement checks. I made a lot of money off the Wollongong group and spent it all. I'm totally dyslexic when it comes to especially enabled when it comes to handling money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a family tradition. Ever had a check for $1 million?
No.
Something interesting. I had one for $1.25 million and got about 400,000 more later. And had enough going that all I had to do was take care of my money and didn't have to work again, but it's all gone. So I'm living in a mobile home in Citrus Heights, California. I'm 81, be 82 in November. I tell people I'm like a teenager. I'm 81 and a half going on 82. And and I've been married 56 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got 4 children and 7 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And my family's a little scattered. I got a granddaughter who's living with her husband in Guadalajara. He had a tail light out on the car. His mother never cleared his papers up, never really got his birth certificate, and they picked him up in Oakland. The next day, he's broke on the street in Tijuana. They deported him.
Yikes.
And how come all these people don't get deported? My granddaughter's husband did. The Oakland police are pretty tough, pretty nasty, actually. And for good reason. It's one of the murder capitals, but that's a whole different kind of story.
Yeah.
So anyway, my basic hobbies are epistemology and eschatology.
I don't know what either of those words means.
Epistemology is study of knowledge.
Okay.
And eschatology is study of final ends. So I'm interested in evolution and the Big Bang. And
okay.
I can explain to you what happened to the Neanderthals, for example. And
not today, thank you.
and I've got a definition of truth based on algorithmic information theory, which comes from defining a lie. Once you know what a lie is, you can define truth. A lie is always the longer path. So guess what the truth is?
The shortest path.
There you go. It's in the algorithmic information theory. It's the fewest bits when you write out the program. Auto racers and runners talk about the true line around a track. That kind of thing. So that would be epistemology, and thinking about the Big Bang and evolution as eschatology. So I'm over intellectual. I can't study. I don't know how to memorize. But I put together odd bits and pieces and kinds of odd facts that give illumination that and very often I'm looking for. I was a big fan of connections. I met that guy at an HP conference once. But the idea of how everything is linked. So then I have that kind of personality, and I spent a lot of years drinking a whole lot. And then one day I had to quit because my liver stopped working. And so now I have a beer belly because I have an enlarged liver, but after 7 years, your liver heals. So I have an extra large liver. I guess that'll make me live longer.
Let's hope so.
No. But I always partied, and I always read a lot. Oddly, I don't read much anymore. And that's, I don't know what that tells you.
If you could send a message to the Atari 8-bit computer users who still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
It's a great machine that lives on. I think it's the best of the survivors from that era. And great stuff still being done with it. You know, one of my favorite guys runs the Atari group over in Davis. What the hell's his name? Kendrick.
Oh, yeah, Bill Kendrick, yeah.
Yeah, wonderful guy. There was something about the Atari, and it has to start with Bushnell, and it has to do with being a good person and loving fun and being interested in the world. And I think you get that still when you work with an Atari or Atari people.
Nice. Cool.
Is that good enough?
That's great. I have what I need. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for calling.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.